Whether you're new to the cruising industry or a seasoned traveler, today we're excited to have Gary Bembridge, who has the insanely popular YouTube channel called Tips for Travelers. Gary will be talking today about everything we need to know about cruising, so stay tuned. Welcome to the Retirement Spy Studio, where we share experiences and a collaborative platform for those entering phase 2 of life and are ready to embrace this chapter with gusto and an attitude of carpe diem. You can find out more about us at www.theretirementspy.com or send us ideas and topics to hello@theretirementspy.com. Today, we were really excited to be joined by Gary Bembridge. Gary created and runs the leading cruise U channel called Tips for Travelers, offering cruise advice and tips. He has over 500,000 subscribers and over 190 million video views to date, and 70% of his viewers are over the age of 55, which is our target audience at the Retirement Spy. Gary, welcome.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
It's amazing that we could get Gary's attention. It seems like he's cruising all the time, which I know he loves to do. So the idea that we had him on land to be able to do this, and I'm assuming we're on land. Are you on a ship?
Yeah,
here?
we're on land. Yeah, I'm at home.
Yeah,
Fairly unusually.
It's a wonderful thing. So before we launch into this, I'm curious because it just came to mind, and you'll have to I apologize for my ADD. How many days a year are you actually off land on the water on a cruise?
So I cruise roughly once a month. I average between 100 and 110 nights actually on a cruise ship every year. So about a third-ish, roughly.
You know, it's amazing. We did a cruise. We do about one a year. And we have a favorite that I won't mention because we're not sponsored and I don't really care. But it was interesting. I've run into more people who are on the cruise ship all the time. I keep up with them via social media, and literally every time I see them, they're on a cruise ship. And there was an article, I think, in the Wall Street Journal about people who've actually done that, and they've sold their residence and they are finding a way to stay on a cruise ship 360 days out of the year, which I think is overkill for me. But it's interesting. It's probably a topic for another time in the future. So tell me, why is cruising so popular for retirees?
I mean, there's a couple of reasons. I mean, one of the simple reasons is it's a great way to travel because you basically unpack once. You can see multiple countries or multiple places in a country without having to pack, unpack, move, get into airports, buses, whatever. And everything's on tap. So all your dining's on tap. You don't have to think around where I'm going to eat. Well, you have a few choices. You don't have to really think about it. If you want to go and do a gym class, you can just do that. You've got your entertainment on tap. You can go to trivia. You can play the casino. It's kind of just all there. So I think that's probably the reason, the simplicity. And also, it's just so diverse. Whether you've got a big budget, a small budget, you want to do something active, you're really into expeditions, you just want to lie around in the sun, so it offers everything for everybody, basically. There's just so much choice and so many options. So I think that's probably why. So if you're a retiree who wants to party later tonight, you can do that. If someone who wants to go to bed early and do enrichment, you can do that. So I think that's why it's so popular. It's kind of, there's so much for everybody to do, but it's just the simplicity, everything on tap.
I'll tell you what my wife would say. It's really about not unpacking. So we can see 15 port of calls on a 2-week vacation and never have to leave your residence, never have to unpack. And for her, that's probably the biggest thing, because as we go from place to place, and especially for the ladies, they may be taking more than necessary and, having to unpack those. And to your point, for me as a husband, it's a no-brainer for me because it's a menu of activities that I can partake on or not partake on. And better yet, it's a safe place that my wife can partake. So if she wants to go gambling or go to a show and I don't, or I want to go to the cigar lounge at one of the cruise vessels, we can divide and conquer and both be, as she would say, happy.
Exactly.
So tell me, what are the biggest misconceptions that retirees may have about cruising?
I think probably it's the same as everybody has about cruising until they do it. This fear of being trapped. People say to you, I don't want to cruise. I'm going to be trapped. I'm going to feel trapped. And then the point I make is, well, hang on a minute. First of all, you're probably in port for most of the day. Then you're going to be there in the evening. So you're going to be sleeping for 5, 6, 8, whatever hours of that. But then once the ship sets sail, you're going to be having a drink, you're going to go to dinner, you're going to go to a show, you're going to be chatting to friends. So you're not going to be trapped at all. I think that's the biggest misconception. People worry about being trapped on this thing. And most people, of course, once they go on a cruise, they realize that's not the case at all. But I think it's a myth. It's the misconception that everybody has. I think, whether you're young, old, whatever, retired, whatever, I think it's the same misconception.
Hey, tell me about this. A lot of friends of mine that I run into have a fear of being seasick, whether they've been seasick or not. And depending on the size of the boat, in the boats I've been on, I don't feel a lot of movement, and you probably don't because you just do it all the time. But people are worried about being seasick, and I have been in areas where the boat never moved and I never felt anything. And a recent cruise we did that we kind of hit the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, we had some tossing, and there are real seasick issues. When people are saying, look, I don't want to go a cruise because I'm worried I'll have a miserable vacation because I'm seasick all the time. Are there places to go? Are there remedies to this? Or is this a misconception?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. A lot of people worry about being seasick, and it is obviously a risk. I mean, even some people who cruise a lot will get seasick. I mean, I'm fortunate, touch wood. I've been on 129 cruises and I've never been seasick, even in really rough seas. So I'm one of those fortunate people. But you're right. A lot of people worry about that. But in reality, to your point, is ships these days have stabilizers. So they can mostly correct a lot of the movement. In reality, the seasickness is caused more by ships kind of rolling rather than if people doing the up and down motion, which ships make, is less. So it's when it rolls. And the idea of the stabilizers to reduce that. But there are remedies. I mean, everything from prescription remedies, which some people have, like the little patches behind the ear, or just across the counter stuff, Dramamine or whatever. And in reality, if you are really, and cruise ships will give you seasick tablets if you're worried about it. And then there is, if you are really seasick, which my partner gets sometimes, is you can actually have, there's an injection you can have. It kind of knocks you out for a while, and then you're as fit as fiddle, as it were. I think people over worry about it. And one of the things that people worry the most about it is a river cruise is the best option to overcome some of that. Because, I mean, I'm sure you probably theoretically could get seasick on a river cruise. I would say it's impossible because the nature of a river cruise and the nature of a river. But that might give people some confidence. Or, you sail in the Med in the middle of summer or the Caribbean at the peak of the season, you're probably going to have the calmest kind of setup. But yeah, I mean, I do see people overly worrying about it. And, the amount of people who get seasick is quite small versus the amount of people who are on a cruise ship. So even on the roughest seas, there's a tiny percentage of people feeling seasick.
For me, if I had any seasickness, which I don't, the cruising is usually at night, so I'm sleeping. And it actually
Yes,
helps me sleep better because it's like rocking in a hammock.
exactly. Yeah, the rocking. I sleep fantastically when the seas are a little bit bumpy because you get that rocking motion is great to sleep in.
It's just absolutely beautiful. The only downside I think I've noticed is that the entertainment that you love at night, the dancers, whatever the stage performers are, they can't perform if it's too rocky. It's kind of hard to see a cabaret or something else when the seas are rough. The poor
Yeah,
dancers are going to turn their ankles or whatever.
yeah. But I must say, like, I mean, I've been on a lot of cruises, and it's very, very very, very rare for a show to be cancelled because of movement. That's how infrequent movement is. I mean, obviously, if you're doing the Drake Passage or something, but then they don't have much entertainment anyway on those kind of ships. But yeah, I think people over worry about it, and pack some medication and you'll be fine.
Every cruise line is going to be different. And the research that I've done, which is nowhere near the research that you've done, is you find cruise ships that are quotes all inclusive. And thus it's difficult because when you're looking at all inclusive, some things really are included and some aren't. Is cruising, when they say it's an all inclusive, is it really the case, or do you really have to kind of drill down to see what it means all inclusive from ship to ship?
I mean, yeah, you do. But broadly speaking, a lot of it depends on what category you're cruising in. So there's sort of, broadly speaking, four categories of cruising. You've got mass resort, which is things like Carnival, MSC, Royal Caribbean, Norwegian. They are the least all-inclusive. So you would always have your food and most of your entertainment included, but they would have the most add-ons of all. And the fares are the lowest, and they basically then kind of nickel and dime if you want to do or have lots of add-ons. Then the premium category, which is Holland America, Celebrity, Princess, Virgin, they have more inclusions. So they're a bit more all-inclusive. Your small ship luxuries like Oceania, Windstar, Viking, they have even more inclusions. And then your ultra luxury are largely all-inclusive of everything. Broadly speaking, in the category that most people cruise in, which is kind of the more mass and the premium category, generally speaking, you're going to have to pay extra for specialty dining, your core dining. You don't have to pay to eat anything. Specialty dining, Wi-Fi, you would have to pay for. Drinks, you have to pay for. Excursions and gratuities. So those are on those two biggest categories, which are probably about 95%, 90 something percent of cruising. It's not that, those are always add-ons. And a lot of the cruise lines, particularly in the premium category, your Princess, Holland America, you can buy packages which will cover that. So you can kind of, going in, okay, before I get on the cruise, I've paid all that stuff up front. Yeah. So
And I think the devil's in the details. And I'll be the first to say that we've stayed in upper end cruise ships that I didn't have to worry about a thing. The only thing I really had to worry about is if there was a unique excursion on shore and they have a package. Most everything was free, but there are unique excursions that had unique dining experiences or wine tastings that you had to pay an extra, and I got that. And everybody's got a different budget. So I think the key is looking at the details, because if you're budget conscious, which is wonderful, you just have to pay attention. But there's nothing more disappointing than looking all-inclusive package and you haven't done your research, and all of a sudden, your margarita is $25. And you're like, wait a minute, I didn't know I was going to get taken advantage of if there's such a thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. And people need to, one of the things I always say to people is when you go cruising, you almost think door to door, because you might be surprised that that line that looks very expensive, once you bundle everything you're going to do, that more premium line might actually be cheaper for you. But think about from the time you leave the door to the time you get home, what are the costs? And there are other tools you can use, like if you drink, for example, if you like drinking alcohol, there are a couple of sites that have a drinks package calculator where you can put how much you're going to drink, and it will say actually it's better to just buy ad hoc or to buy a package. So there's kind of different resources that you can use. But the thing that throws people probably the most, because I think most people realize some of the things are not included, is gratuities. That's the one thing that catches most people out, because most lines don't include gratuities unless you're at the upper end. And effectively, it's a pity, because in reality, in my view, those lines use gratuities to give the headline fare lower. So if you go on Holland America in these lines, you're paying $18 if you're not in a suite, $20 per person per day if you're in a suite. So it's a couple of $100 on top of your cruise fare. So instead of just having a cruise fare that's $700, $800, whatever dollars higher, they charge gratuities. Well, they don't call gratuities anymore because it's not really gratuities. They're called service charge or crew appreciation. But that's the one that catches a lot of people out, because they think, okay, I'm not going to buy Wi-Fi, I'm not going to drink, I'm going to self-explore, and then they get hit with a bill for a couple of $100 for gratuities. That's the one that catches most people out.
And the rule of thumb here is do your research. I mean, if you're buying something in a package, just make sure that you know what you're getting, and it's just a question of being diligent and looking at your research when you do that.
Yeah. And one of the things, Duncan, that just sort of linked to that is that, because I'm sure we'll come on and talk about it, one of the things I always recommend people do, particularly if they're new to cruising, is use a travel agent, because a travel agent will make sure that you understand those things. And a good travel agent. So you want someone who's you want someone who's a cruise expert. And ideally, it's a person rather than just, a lot of people will say, oh, I've used a travel agent. And you didn't really, you went to an online site where you just tap stuff in. You want someone that you can talk to. So like I recommend, people who are often self-employed, part of a network. So they have all the, the clout behind them. But travel agent will sit through and say, okay, let's look at your budget. If you want to go on this line, these are the things that are included. This is not included. And of course, they'll help you get on the right line and stuff. But a lot of people, I think the mistake going off first time is they'll do the research, but they'll miss something. There's a risk they'll miss something. A good travel agent will make sure that you don't miss something.
And I think in my experience, I think people think they're paying extra if they get a travel agent. We booked a cruise one time and got confused on the details, so to speak, and just grabbed a friend and said, hey, look, will you jump in here, please? Price never changed. And there is a click. A lot of the luxury liners will say, all right, do you have a travel agent? And some of them may really encourage you to use one. And she jumped in and found things, gave us some details, things we need to know about, and then some extras that we weren't expecting that through her leverage or whatever she could do to help. And I think that's
important. I mean, it's very important. To your point, is cruise lines never. It's unlike sometimes you get a better rate if you book directly with a hotel. Cruise lines never, ever, ever will give you a lower price than an agent. Agents generate around 70% of their business, and sometimes it's even higher. It's huge. Agents are hugely important to directing people on, not only getting new to cruise, directing people on, but getting them on the right. So you will never get a cheaper price going direct. So it's like, why would you go direct? Because you can get all the advice and help. And as you say, some travel agents might give you extra onboard credit, or they can unlock perks, because the cruise lines will often give travel agents deals because they don't want to advertise them publicly. Or travel agents, particularly part of big groups, might have a special rate. So it's like, why would you go direct?
No, you're exactly right. And in all fairness, I like what you said. Don't just get a travel agent, get an experienced cruise travel agent, because they've done it so many times. They know what's going to go right and what's going to go wrong. And oh, by the way, you didn't think about this. For this cruise line, you have to pay attention to this because of this, and you're going to this port of call, and this is what you need to know. Episode 1, for those who are Retirement Spy fans, Josephine Hooser is my travel agent and my niece. She'd really give some great advice on cruising. To your point, Gary, it's a wonderful thing, and there's no reason why not to do it.
Well, it's interesting. I know we're going off on a slight tangent, but people often will contact me getting really frustrated because they've contacted the cruise line and they have got confusing advice. And my point is, if you phone a cruise line, you're getting a sales rep. Their job is to sell cabins. They don't know the ins and outs of the cruise ship, the cruise line, the itinerary, visas required. So often, you'll see people being denied boarding because they didn't have the right visa. And they say, oh, but I phoned the cruise line and they told me they didn't need it. The cruise line get out is, it's up to you. The travel agent will say, by the way, if you are an American citizen boarding a ship in Brazil that's going to Argentina, you need a visa. For example, because 120 people got refused boarding recently in Buenos Aires from the US and Canada because they didn't have visas, because they'd booked direct and hadn't gone through a travel agent. All the people who booked through travel agents arrived with their visas, or those who've done their own research. So it's like, it's all that added little stuff that can slip through the cracks beyond price that helps. Sorry, I went off on a travel agent.
No,
I think for people looking at it for the first time, it's really worth doing.
It's so important. So I'm going to ask you the tough question. I think this is in the back of all of our audience's mind, is the cruise ship industry is enormous, and trying to pick the right cruise line, there's got to be different categories. Now, people may know what a Carnival is because of its advertisement, and maybe I'm too old for Carnival unless I've got grandkids. But give us, if there's a way to categorize bunches of cruise ships as they fit into different parts of life and what are important for retirees to know.
Yeah, so I think from a retiree perspective, the biggest category of all, I mean, by far in terms of numbers traveled, is that the mass resort lines, Sea, Carnival, Norwegian and Royal Caribbean. But if you are a retiree, I would tend to steer away from those because they are very family focused. They are big. They're very loud. They're high energy. So unless that's what you want, but some of them are perfect if you're going on a multi-generational trip. They're fantastic because what you can do on Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, MSC, you can, if you're going with a family, you can get everything from very expensive cabins through to really cheap, inexpensive, less than $100 per person a night cabins. So if you're going with a family, different budgets, everyone can get a cabin within their budget. They've got family cabins and so on. Also, there's enough on the ship that if you don't want to go partying all night, your kids and your teenage grandkids or whatever want to, or your if they've got really young grandkids, they can go off to the kids club. So everyone can get the most out of it. So that's really good for that. But if you were just traveling as a retiree alone, the best category to look at within sort of a more realistic budget still is the premium category. And those lines are a little bit more traditionally skewed towards an older crowd. They are evolving and trying to get more families on board. But Holland America, Princess, Celebrity, and actually now Virgin Voyages. And I'll come back to Virgin Voyages because they're quite an interesting one for retirees to think about, which sounds a little bit odd, but they are actually quite good for retiree age group. Holland America, and Cunard is also in that group. But they have traditionally catered for couples, tended to be older, average age, depending on the time of year, could be 50s, 60s, and some long routes. Like I've just been on a month on Holland America, it's probably skewing more closer to 70 than anything else because it's a month long in time. But also the whole program, the daily program, is much more catered towards kind of a little bit more sedate stuff, if you like. They still will have a nightclub and that sort of stuff, But your fellow travelers are probably going to be more like you, if you like, so you can have more in common with them. But again, from a budget perspective, those ships have inside cabins. So if you are on a tight budget, you can get that for, a couple of $100 per person a night, with all your food and entertainment included. But you can go right up to a nice suite, which is going to cost you $1,000 or more a night. So you can still get that whole range of experience. But they are the best one. They'll have more enrichment, lots of trivia, that kind of stuff. And they will still have parties. But if you do have more budget, the one that's really appealing from a retiree's perspective is that small ship luxury area, which is Oceania, Viking, Star, Azamara, is in that category. They are slightly smaller. They have less entertainment, so they have less shows and stuff. They have some of them, not all of them, but like Not all in this category, though, have a casino. So Viking, Azamara, Windstar don't really have casinos, but they are a little bit more focused on destination. They are very much more focused on food. So you'll find there's many more kind of dining options included within the fare. And they do focus much more on enrichment. So if you are sort of really want to learn more about being immersed in the destination, be immersed in the region, that's really good if you've got that budget. But you are talking, at least $600 a person a night in reality in that sort of space. It's much more expensive to ship smaller, the food's higher quality and so on. But that's that. If you have the budget, that's a really kind of nice sweet spot. Then if you have more budget, you've got the ultra luxury, that's Silver Sea, Explorer Journeys, Seabourn, Regent. They're smaller ships. They have really interesting itineraries, the longer voyages. Crystal's also there. So because they tend to cater for an older crowd because they have the budget. So they also have longer itineraries, sort of slightly more exotic itineraries. So, and if you want to be pampered much more, that's the place to go. It's a little bit more laid back, much more, even more sophisticated. Food's even higher quality. But the real spot, I think, practically speaking, for most people's budgets, particularly on a retirement budget, that premium category, Holland America, Princess, Celebrity, and Cunard. The reason I was saying Virgin's in that space. Most people think of Virgin as was created for young people. It wasn't by definition because it's adults only. So the good thing is it's adult only. So particularly if you're sailing, Christmas time, school holiday time, and you want to make sure there's no kids on board, Virgin is a good one to choose. The average age on Virgin is around 50 to 55, but you'll find a wide range of, from sort of younger people, but tends to skew a little bit older. But if you are someone who wants, or retiree who's much more into fitness, likes good food, stay up a little bit later, have a little bit more party options, which is a really good option. The food is excellent on Virgin, but it's not all kind of mad sex, drugs, and rock and roll kind of thing that people thought it was going to be. It's like, and the food is really good on Virgin. It's kind of they're focused on food.
Are they trying to rebrand themselves, Gary? Because to your point, the people who know that would say, I don't want to even touch that. Is Virgin Atlantic trying to really rebrand themselves?
No, I mean, there was really just a lot of misunderstanding. I think Virgin, when they first went into it, were probably thinking, this is going to be like for the 30-somethings, people who don't cruise, for people who don't want to cruise. But in reality, if you look at it, they focused a lot on the Caribbean initially and the Mediterranean. But if you are a 30-something or even a 30-something, you probably don't have the budget. You say, well, hang on a minute, I can do a 2-week cruise on Royal Caribbean, party much more, have much more going on than 1 week on Virgin. If you're 40-something, you've probably got kids, so you can't go on Virgin. So you can only go on Virgin once because it's 18 plus. So your kids either have to be much older or your kids have to have left home. So there's a lot of people I know who are kind of, 60s, even 70s, that love Virgin, because it's a good vibe about it, good food. And actually Virgin has, to your point of rebranding, recently there was just before Sea Trade, which is the big get together with all the heads of the cruise lines. They did talk about how they sort of want to get the messaging shifted away from the sense of we're for young people, because they're not. They're for youthful minded people is what they sort of try to say, kind of irrespective of age, but you do want a bit more kind of buzz and partying kind of, I guess.
How important is the size of a cruise ship? Is it just more amenities and everything else? Or because people are like, when I hear people talk about a cruise ship, they go, oh, that's one of the big boats versus some of maybe the super high-end luxury have smaller capacity, and maybe that comes with the premium. So tell me about the size of the ship and why.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, probably you're right. One of the misconceptions you could put in the misconception box, I guess, is that a lot of people associate cruising with those big, massive mega ships and forget that actually you can do a cruise on everything from a 200 passenger ship to a 7,000 passenger ship. But right, size is important. So a lot of it, again, if you were sitting with a travel agent, they'd talk you through this. A lot of it is like, what do you want? So if you're saying, well, look, I love to go to the casino and I want a big, busy casino and I want to have a big I want a Broadway show that I can go and see. And then you would say, well, hang on a minute, then you have to go on a bigger ship. You have to go on a Royal Caribbean, Norwegian, because they're going to have a massive casino. They're going to have Broadway shows or big spectacles. Royal Caribbean has ice skating shows and water, Cirque du Soleil water kind of shows. But if that's really important to you, then you need to go on a big ship. The option you have, if you want to go on a big ship, is a lot of those do have sort of ship within a ship where they are suites, so you have to have the budget. But they're kind of, you can sort of escape kind of the busyness of it all and sort of retreat into a more quiet area. I mean, like Norwegian actually calls it the haven, for example. But that's why why a lot of people find the sort of the mid-sized ship, which you have in Holland America Celebrity, that they're about a 2,000 to 2,500 passenger ship. For me, that's quite a good. Certainly, if you're trying cruising for the first time, it's quite a good mid-sized ship because it's big enough that it's going to have entertainment. It's going to have a decent-sized casino. It's going to have quite a busy daily program. It's also going to have some craft classes. It's going to have cooking demonstrations, blah, blah. It's going to have a lot of stuff going on. Well, a choice of, maybe 6 bars you can go to, 2 lounges, 3 places doing live music. That's a good kind of way to go without, particularly if you're worried about being trapped. Personally, but you're right. Once you get into the smaller ship size, you're probably just going to have, a couple of guys and gals doing a song and dance review, or some don't even dance, a song review at night, some guest entertainers. There might be 2 bars you can choose from, a much quieter daily program. So instead of 4 things being on every hour, there'll be, okay, there's trivia on this hour, there's a craft class on now, there's an enrichment lecture now. Whereas on the bigger ships, you'll have a craft class and an enrichment lecture and trivia on at the same time, kind of thing. So it's about how much choice you want and how much stuff going on you want.
I'll say, just probably because I'm older, the smaller ships, which are more expensive, I'm all about the port of call and seeing the tours during the day. And I'm moving fast during the day and having a great time. When I come back, I might hit the casino, but I'm not going to party all night long. I want a good dinner, a good meal. 2 bars is fine for me. The show, if I'm awake, I'll go see the show. And it's just our age and the way we approach things. So that quieter always works well for me. But once again, I'm sure we got some retirees out there like, I want to throw down and party. And, maybe they don't even care about the protocol. They're like, I'm just going to stay in the casino all day and go by the pool. And that's fine. And that's
exactly. Fine. I mean, Duncan, you also, what are the smaller ship lines, like in that sort of small ship luxury, ultra luxury, what they also do, come back to your point about, because a lot of people want those for the ports, they tend to have more overnights. So you'll find some of them will on the itinerary, they'll stay overnight more, so people can spend more time in the port, out in the port at night. So the bigger ships, they will have some overnights, but not very often. They will normally put in the day and go.
This is a really good point. I've done Regent, and there are ports that they can go to that the bigger ones can't. So you have a feeling of exclusivity because they're able to dock in places, or in some places you can't dock. So they have the dinghies, they'll anchor and they'll take you into town that the big ships can't go to. So there are places that you can go that the big ships can't, that the smaller, maybe higher end can get to.
Yeah, and I think it's very important because the smaller ships will use that as a selling point, but it only applies in certain regions in reality. If you're doing a Caribbean route, not that many places a smaller ship goes that the bigger ships can't go. There's a few. But once you go into places like Asia, the other plus you have is, the small ship will go right into the Saigon in Ho Chi Minh City, whereas the bigger ships have to be an hour and a half away in Phu. The same as, if you go on a smaller ship into Shanghai, you right into the Bund. The bigger ships are out, an hour out. Smaller ships in Hong Kong will go right into, the heart of Hong Kong. The others are out at the old airport. So there's also that element of, destination is really important on a small ship. In some of those more exotic places, you can literally get off if you're in Shanghai and you're right in the heart of the city. Whereas if you're on a bigger ship, you have to get a transfer and a bus and whatever. That is a factor as well, for sure.
When I think of cruises, I think of 2 major categories. I think of ocean cruises and river cruises. Help our audience understand the benefits of both, because it's almost like saying apples and oranges. They're 2 different things, but as people are looking under the cruise, what do they think about when you think of ocean versus river, and what should they consider?
Yeah, I think it's important. I often say to people that ocean cruising and river cruising, as you were saying, are completely different things in almost every way you can possibly imagine, other than they both have the word cruise in their name. So that's the important thing to understand, is like, if you love ocean cruising, you may not like river cruising. If you like river cruising, you may not like ocean cruising. But I think the key thing, if you think about river cruising, the key thing to think about is, first of all, you're relatively limited where you can go. Most river cruising at the moment, of course, is in Europe. And it's mostly on the Danube and on the Rhine. Obviously, it goes to the Douro, and you can go on the Moselle and other rivers and stuff. It's sort of expanding. You've got the Mekong, the Nile, some in the US, and so on. But the thing with river cruising is, I always say to people, do you like the idea of kind of going on an escorted bus tour around a place? Because it's more akin to that. River cruising people don't like that analogy. But my point is, you're in a relatively small structure, because they have to be small, to fit under the bridges and in the locks, etc. So you're talking maximum 198 people. Now there is Magna on the Danube, which is bigger than that. So it's kind of small and very intimate. So if you like a very small, intimate experience, you're going to get that, but you're not going to get a lot of choice. On ocean cruising, you're going to have the main dining room and the buffet and something else. On most river cruises, you will have one restaurant. You might have a second option, and it's much more regimented. So on a river cruise, it'll be right. We're up at 8 because we're doing breakfast, and then the tours will go. Obviously, you can skip the tour if you want, but you might find the breakfast ends. Whereas on a cruise ship, you can almost eat any time of the day you want, but kind of that ends. Then you might have to be back at lunchtime because we're leaving to go down to the next place to do more tours. So it's much more kind of regimented. There's much less choice and people have a much more shared experience. On an ocean cruise, you have loads of choices. Where I'm going to eat, what I'm going to do in port, when I'm going to do it, what bar I'm going to go to, what entertainment I'm going to do. On a river cruise, you generally don't have entertainment. You might have a briefing, you might have some local musicians may come on. But also, you need to really love kind of history and culture in a way. So people often joke on a river cruise particularly in Europe, is every day you're going to see a cathedral. And the next day you're going to see another cathedral, another cathedral, another cathedral, because you are in these very small towns which grew up along the river, and there's cathedrals. And in some places, obviously, you'll do some more exciting thing. You might go to a vineyard or whatever. But it's really about exploring kind of small towns close to the port. Saying that, there are, if you go on the Danube, you can see some. You can have quite an interesting experience if you say, right, I want to see Budapest, I want to see Vienna, I want to see Bratislava. In 7 days you can go to 3 iconic cities, but it's all about the culture stuff. If you're if you love ziplining and all this sort of stuff, you're not going to get that. It's like river cruising is sort of trying to attract more families. I'm struggling with that because I'm not sure that cathedral viewing is a big turn on for 9 and 10-year-olds. They haven't figured that out yet. I'm sure they will figure that out yet. River cruising is a much more kind of intimate cultural sort of experience. So if you want to be anonymous, now the good thing on a lot of cruise ships, you can go on a cruise ship and just be anonymous. You can be with your partner or whatever, or yourself. On a river cruise ship, everybody will know you. So if you're very sociable, it's great because there'll be 100 and something people and you get to know and spend time with. But it's
So what a great insight. We haven't done a riverboat cruise. We had some friends who just did, and that's exactly what they said, is everyone will know you. It's a small group. He was categorizing it seems to be an older group too. Somehow that riverboat cruises attract older.
Because it's a little bit
less mobile crowd.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because it does tend to attract a much older crowd, definitely. And often it's because a lot of river cruise companies also sell quite door-to-door programs as well. Certainly, in the UK, a lot of them, the transfers will be included. So, once you get to the airport, there'll be people there to meet you. They'll take you to the ship. They'll make someone there all the time checking on you, that everything's okay. When you go on tours, your small little groups, they'll have a slow walkers group always. They'll take you back to the airport. There'll be people at the airport making sure you got your luggage is checked, you're checked in. So it's quite good if you're a more nervous traveler in reality, which is why I think it also appeals sometimes to older travelers. It's like, okay, I've got someone kind of looking after me, sorting things out. Also, this might sound slightly bizarre, but actually, if you're worried about medical things, the advantage with river cruises don't have medical centers, but of course they are within spitting distance of massive hospitals and doctors and stuff. So actually, on a cruise ship, it's different because you have a medical center which is there to stabilize and make sure you're okay. And if you're not at the next port, they'll throw you off and evacuate you. But I mean, they'll basically offload you into a medical thing and the ship will go. Whereas the river cruise, the ship is never it's only down the road. It's maybe 20 miles away is the next port. It's like they're actually rejoining or whatever is fairly simple. River cruise don't go very far.
No.
Often you'll find out if you're going to Viking, the coaches they use follow the boat. They follow, when you get out, oh my God, it's the same bus and the same bus driver. It's like, because he had to drive like an hour down the road to join you. You've been standing for 4 hours, 5 hours. He used to run an hour down the road to join you. Yeah.
So let me ask you the tough question. My wife and I found when we've been on ocean cruises, river cruises, we're looking at the destination first. So when we're planning it, what we're looking at is we want to see a region. And what we love about going to the protocols is we can spend a day or two in a port, not because we want to check the box to say we went to Istanbul, but because we loved Istanbul so much, we want to come back and spend a week. And so the way we approach our cruises is where we not seen before, so we can take a look at how much we want to come back and spend more time there. When somebody in the world of cruising is saying, okay, I want to have my first cruise or I want to plan a cruise, the world is an ocean. And how do you even begin other than, okay, I've always wanted to go to the Mediterranean? How would you advise our audience how to break down when they say, I want to go on a cruise? What questions should they be asking themselves to make sure that they're picking a cruise that's best for them?
I mean, I think your point to raise is quite important. I guess it's sort of like, I would always start with like, where do I want to go? Like I have a list, which never gets short, unfortunately, of all the places I want to go and things I want to see. And start with a list and think, okay, where do I really want to go? And then often asking the question, is this best seen on a cruise or not? So, I would, some places like Australia, for example, that a lot of people go cruising on. In reality, it's probably better doing it as a land-based than it's cruising, just because the nature of the way Australia is and what you're going to see and all that sort of stuff. So, but it's worth having that sort of list and then saying, okay, with it, why do I want to go to those places? Because actually, if you discover the reason you want to go is stuff's actually very far inland, then it's like, well, it probably doesn't make sense. But if you want to go, if you say, I've always wanted to go to the Mediterranean because I want to see Florence and I want to see the Colosseum in Rome and I want to see the Familia Sagrada in Barcelona. And you go, well, actually, a cruise is brilliant for that. In a 7-day, 10-day cruise, you could do all of those, which you could never do on land, in a land-based thing in 7 to 10 days. So I think a lot of it's asking around, where do I want to go? And is a cruise the best way of doing it? Or could a cruise be the best way of doing this? Or if, like, I really want to explore, these, like, I want to go to the Caribbean, but I'm not sure which island's really for me. Well, go on a cruise because you'll get a good flavor of all the islands. That'll help you decide, actually, I really loved St. Lucia, I'm going to go back, kind of thing.
I'm sorry, I'll say some of the details. Once you pick the location, as an example for us, we're foodies, so we like really good food. So food is an important part, and there the cruise lines that will have culinary extravaganzas that are associated with the protocol that you are. So today we're going to be talking about whatever we see in Barcelona, and this is something that's native to Barcelona. Or two that I thought was really important is we want education. So we're not just not going to see a specific museum. What we're going to talk about is the architectural construct behind the museum that was created years ago and what was happening in the kingdom at the time between the factions that were fighting. I really love that education. So there are different cruise ships that really focus on education, food, and other nuances, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's very important. To your point is the other thing to ask is, what experience do you want on board? Because you're right. If you were saying, okay, food is really important to me and I want to be able a chance to have local food on board and I want to be educated, that would cut out lots of lines to start with, because very few cruise ships actually will do local food because it's too complicated. The logistics are just too complicated. So most ships will have more or less the same menu, whether in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean, Asia, etc. And there's the whole logistics, particularly the bigger ships, because you've got to do thousands of meals. Other line, like Silversea, for example, would say, right, we have the SALT program where they specifically change menus for each sub-region. And it's a very specific menu for that sub-region. They bring on the food or whatever. Other lines will do it a little less detailed. But they might say, okay, we'll have some themed dinners or whatever. But right, then other cruise lines will offer actual excursions where you go out with the chef and buy stuff and that sort of stuff. But right, it's asking an experience. So if you're really into enrichment, I would say in that premium category, I would steer people more towards, say, Holland America than Celebrity, because Holland America have better enrichment. If you're really into food and that sort of stuff, you would direct people more towards Oceania or region, because they also have the cooking programs and the cooking classes and stuff. But that's really important, defining what you want. And again, that's something the travel agents say, well, hang on a minute, don't go on Princess because they don't do that. Do go on this line because they.
Yeah, I mean, if you like your chicken nuggets and your hamburger by the pool, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want escargot off the coast of France or some unique fish, there are different places you can go to take a look at that. Let me ask you about budget. In our crowd here, we've got people for all ranges of affordability, and you touched on it briefly. And it's a tough question because if you want to just have a cabin versus an all-inclusive cabin, there's going to be one price for the others. Give me a range from the low, and let's just say all-inclusive. What's the low range all-inclusive? And give me a category versus the upper range, which you would spend for just a cabin, not a suite, not anything else, just your basic cruise cabin?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's very difficult to do because it's on even on the same ship. You know, if you go on Royal Caribbean, you could spend anything from like $200 a night to $85,000 a night on a
Per
Royal
person.
Caribbean ship. Yeah, but to give you a rough guide, if you just take roughly, I'll give you the fare price, the fare, the fare, and then we'll talk a little bit about add-ons. But if you were to go in the sort of the mass resort category, you could probably get, and I'll do it as a balcony cabin because then it's consistent across all of them, and most people, that's their ideal is a balcony cabin. But you can probably get, let's say, sort of mid to early season, you could probably get a cabin for two people for about $200 a night. So about $100 a night in that. But you're then probably going to spend about the same on add-ons, depending on what your add-ons are. If you go up to the premium category, so your Holland America Celebrity, you're probably talking about $400 for two people a night. So the cabin about $400 for sort of a balcony. If you go to the small ship, you're talking about $600 a night. If you go to the region stuff, you're probably talking about $1,000 a night. But that's sort of for the cabins. You're probably going to spend, maybe $100 or so. It's so hard with inclusions. But if you say you drink a bit, you're going to do a couple of excursions, you gratuities. So you're probably talking about another $100 on those first two categories on top. But it's sort of it goes roughly sort of 200, 400, 600,000 is roughly the benchmark that I would use.
So, and it's also about your season too. The great thing about
Exactly.
retirees is we don't have to go in premium season. When families are out on vacation or the working stiffs, all my friends, are still there and they have to come at different times. So if you're in the Caribbean, an off season would be spring or fall, or would it be?
Yeah, the thing that I always recommend to people who don't have to worry about traveling with kids is shoulder season, as I call it. Shoulder season is the best one because you want kind of decent weather. You don't want to worry about hurricanes coming or cyclones or whatever, sort of monsoons in Asia or whatever. So those sort of shoulder seasons. So you're really talking, if you're talking around about sort of May, June time is a really good time because it's after the Easter holidays where a lot of people do stuff, but and also a lot of the ships are moving. Like, so in Europe, for example, a lot of the ships have moved from the Caribbean into the Med. So they're all arriving. There's lots of itineraries, lots of choice, and fares are sharp because, that it's not a busy time. Weather's pretty good. That's, again, sort of September, October is a great time. So it's before the ships head back to the Caribbean. So the same, that will be the same time for Alaska. So that sort of May, June time, Alaska, that sort of September, October time is a good time in Alaska. Because what they do is most of the ships in the Caribbean, sort of from November to March-ish, April time, then most of them will go either to Alaska or to the Med. So in the Caribbean, a really good time is sort of, again, that October, November time, so before the Christmas time. But January, sort of late January, early February is a really good time. Lots of availability, good deals. In Asia, it's again in those similar times. So that September, October, because a lot of ships will also move between Alaska and Japan as well. So that, again, that sort of May, June time, September, October time is those, unfortunately, they're all the same times, but that's the best time to go because it's going to be the quietest of all.
Tell me about booking, Ben, because we just don't know enough about cruises. When we look at bookings, places we want to go, some of these places are booked a year in advance or 2 years in advance, or at least they say they are. And then again, I found websites where, and I'm going to get it wrong, but it's like lastminutebooking.com. And you can get cruises if you can leave within 3 days notice or 7 days notice. How should you book a cruise? Should you book in advance? If you can have the flexibility, can you book at the last minute? How do you find the best deals out there?
Yeah. So in reality, getting last minute deals pre-pandemic time was more of a thing in reality. But in the last couple of years, if you take a look at, by the end of March, Carnival Corporation, that's across all of their brands, Holland America, Princess, Seabourn, they had sold 85% of cabins across all of their inventory for 2026. And they've already sold a big slug of 2027. The same for the Royal Caribbean Group and so on. What's happening now is people are booking very far in advance. So the best price you're going to get is booking when itineraries are released. So that's 2 years, 18 months to 2 years in advance. And because cruise lines, like airlines, use dynamic pricing. So as the ship fills up, the price goes up. So it's very unusual in the big regions, particularly like Alaska and Caribbean, very popular areas. It's very unusual for prices to go down. So that's the best thing to do. What I also recommend though is, so I book all my cruises way in advance, way in advance. But also what I recommend people then do is fare track. So you can do fare tracking, and there are a couple of sites where you can input the cruise you're going on, what cabin you got inside, balcony, whatever, mini suite, whatever you've got, and it will send you alerts if pricing changes. There's a couple of sites that do that. And on my site, I've got an article with all the kind of the three key ones that I would use. If the price goes down and you get an alert, then what you should then try and do is get your travel agent to contact the line. Now, some lines will offer there's very few lines that offer a lowest price guarantee. A couple do, like Oceania does, for example, but you have to contact them. They don't do it proactively. Some lines will go, no, price is locked in, we're not doing anything. But a lot of lines, if you haven't paid final balance, which is normally 90 days before, some cruise lines are in advance, sometimes you can negotiate either a reduction in fare to match the new price or to be upgraded. So if you paid 100 for an ocean view cabin and now balcony cabins are going for 100, they might say, right, we'll move you to balcony cabin to match. Or they'll give you onboard credit with the difference. So I've had that before. I've been on cruises where I've got after final balance. After final balance, they won't reduce the fare. They might give you onboard credit. But I've been on cruises where I've had like $1,500 onboard credit because it was a price change. In my case, it was a solo, and they were doing a no solo supplement, and so I got that. So book really, really early and fare track, and you can set up the alerts, and it tells you. I mean, you're right. The other thing you can do is wait for last minute, but last minute is more within 90 days, because 90 days is when final balance have to be paid. That's when cruise lines know, okay, 20% of people have dropped out, 5% of people have dropped out. Now we have 100 cabins, 10 cabins, what cabins we need to sell. So there is a chance that they will then look to sell those, and they may do deals on them. This is when I was talking earlier around, but they may not advertise the deals because people fare track and then there are people phone them. So they sometimes do is they'll push those out through travel agents, so big groups, or they might use some of these sites like Vacations to Go, for example, is probably the biggest of all. So if you go to Vacations to Go and you can put in like, I want to go, where are we now? We're recording this in April. I want to go in June, blah. It'll tell you, okay, here's some deals we've got in June for you. But that really close to sailing is very unusual these days, because cruise lines have normally filled their ships, and after 90 days the cancellation is enormous. So they don't need to discount that much because they've got money in the bank. So book really, really early. If you are flexible, which a lot of retirees are, you're saying, I want to go away in June. Sound like talk to your travel agent. What's going on in June? What can you get me? They might say, well, actually, we've got a deal come in from Cunard or whatever for June. At whatever price. And as I said, they often won't advertise it because they don't want all the fare trackers to come. The other thing to do, which is a really good idea, which I strongly encourage people to do, and I do it myself, is any cruise line that you're interested in, follow them on social media and interact with them. So Facebook and Instagram are the two best, and sign up for their newsletters. But you'll find if they are doing some promotions, that they might do this. Cruise lines will often do flash sales, which they tend to do at the end of a quarter, I guess, numbers. So they might run over a weekend, like a couple of weekends ago, interestingly, before the end of March, in the first quarter, there was a couple of cruise lines, Royal Caribbean, Celebrity, and MSC. They ran flash sales, 48 hours, X% off. Then you can quickly go and look, is there anything for June, for next month or the month after within that offer? And that's where they get round people fare tracking, because they go, well, no, that was a special promotion. It's not a fare reduction. Because they'll normally argue they won't match short promotions. And normally they're gone in the trackers too quickly. Those are my tips.
That's so helpful. I'm curious, do cruise ships have brand loyalty? Meaning, if you're a cruiser, how often would you ever, if you're a Royal Caribbean fan, ever switch to do something else? And how do the cruise ships promote that? I know they have reward programs. We're on one of them, but I would love to try some other cruise ships, but I love what I found so far, and I'm reluctant to go try something else.
Yeah, people are pretty loyal to a cruise line, and I used to discourage it in some ways, but I can see why. If you're going on a cruise once a year and you love Silver Sea, Celebrity, like, the risk is high in terms of changing. But the good news is that what the cruise lines are doing now is there are ways that you can move around and use your loyalty. So one of the things to do is if you've cruised a lot. So for example, I'll give you the example. The Royal Caribbean group have Royal Caribbean, Celebrity, and Silver Sea. So what they've said is we will status match. So if you've got high status on celebrity, if you go on a Royal Caribbean cruise, we will match the status and give you the perks. If you go on Silver Sea, we'll do the same. Now, obviously, you might have a slightly lower status because Silver Sea is a more premium line and stuff. So for example, I had a high status on celebrity. When I went on Royal Caribbean, it gave me platinum status or diamond status, which gave me access, gave me early embarkation, access to a dedicated lounge, for drink vouchers per day. So that's a way of then saying, okay, I want to experiment, but like stay within that group, and I'll get some more perks. Norwegian group, so that's Oceania, Norwegian, and Regent, do the same. So, for example, I had high status on Regent. I went on an Oceania cruise at Christmas. They status matched and gave me $650 onboard credit, which then covered, of course, gratuities, etc., etc. Sea cruises will status match anybody. Explorer Journeys. So if you've got status on Cunard, on anything, in fact, even Hertz, if you've got gold on Hertz, they will match anything. So you can get status. Virgin will do it more erratically. They do it promotionally. The only group that doesn't do it is the Carnival Corporation. So if you've got status on Seabourn or Holland America or Princess, they don't match across. So it's a little bit, you could decide if you want to start on cruising or to do it strategic and say, right, I'm going to do it with Royal Caribbean, start with celebrity, build status, because I can actually get some benefits as I move around. Because the great thing when I went on Royal Caribbean is I didn't spend any money on drinks, because 4 drinks vouchers for me was more than enough for a day. You're out in port and whatever. So you can play that game a little bit. So actually, I think it's quite a clever way of keeping people loyal within a corporation. I'm surprised it's such a pity that Carnival Corporation haven't done it yet, because I think getting people moving between their brands would be sensible, but they haven't.
Wait till we hit a recession. It'll happen one way or the other.
Yeah.
Gary, you've been so wonderful to be on the program today. How can our readers and listeners find out more about you and follow you?
The best way, my biggest channel of all is on YouTube. So it's Tips for Travelers. It's spelled the UK way, but if you put in Tips for Travelers 1L, YouTube will send you there. So it's called Tips for Travelers. I also do have a website, which is tipsfortravelers.com. You can spell it with 2 L's or 1 L and it'll go there either way. Then I'm on social media and stuff as well. And all the links for social media on both my YouTube channel and my website. But those are probably the easiest ways to find me.
He works on land and on the ocean. That's the one thing we know about Gary.
Yeah.
Gary, thank you so much for being on The Retirement Spy. Hopefully we can have you back on the show again in the future for some more advice and follow-up questions that we didn't get to today.
Brilliant. That sounds good. Thanks for having me, Duncan.
Thank you.